All right, let's do it. Welcome, welcome. For those of you joining us, you are in the right spot for our virtual tour of Machu Picchu. We're going to put 1 minute on the clock to let folks wander on in, and then we will get going. This is awesome. This is going to be a big virtual tour. Love it. Outstanding. While we wait, this is kind of a fun one because this is definitely a location outside the US that maybe not as many folks have been to, but let's launch our poll. Have you been to Machu Picchu before? One of the 7 wonders of the world, a UNESCO heritage site. That's awesome. We actually have some folks. Good, good, good. Joining from Liverpool, England. Awesome. You can let us know in the chat where you're coming from too. That's always fun. All right, 5 seconds on the poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Israel, London, New York City. Outstanding. Awesome. Cool. So it looks like the vast majority of us have not had the chance to go before. So this will be a perfect introduction. Take some notes, do some planning, and get ready for your in-person trip because it has reopened as of November 1st. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll go ahead and get started now that we got about 200 folks on the Magic School Bus. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris, and I will be your virtual tour guide as we spend the next 30 minutes exploring Machu Picchu using Google Earth. Our quick little Zoom housekeeping before we get underway. I've dropped a whole bunch of links in that chat section, including the UNESCO link to Machu Picchu, as well as our Otter AI, our live transcription service, which has the text as I talk really fast. We also have our AS interpreter here. Thank you for being here. Additionally, you can use that chat section if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, and we'll try and help you out in that chat. Otherwise, near the end of this, there should be a Q&A option somewhere down on the bottom of your screen. But disclaimer, I am by no means a professional historian, geographer, archaeologist, anything like that. Just a person that likes to travel and geeks out with Google Maps. So please do continue to look up and do your own research as we go with this, as there's parts that pique your interest. Otherwise, use the Q&A at the end after I get done rambling, and you can ask about any information that I might not have covered. All right, here we go. Buckle up. Let's get started as we jump into our Google Earth presentation as we go to Machu Picchu. And we start off with a big overview of South America, a location that we haven't done very many virtual tours towards. And with this, we are going to first talk about UNESCO World Heritage Sites. If you joined us earlier this year, we talked about the 7 wonders of the world and how they're not super duper formal in their recognition of natural wonders, man-made wonders, but the United Nations actually provides a list of World Heritage Sites, and it uses the initialism of UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, to provide this list of 1,121 sites divvied up by cultural significance and natural significance, or what Machu Picchu is today, mixed significance, meaning there is value culturally, naturally, according to world history for both those designations. And let's start creeping in there and start with a nice historical context, which I like to do, as we first talk about the Inca or Incan Empire, which can be spelled with a C, or we can throw a K in there as well. The Incan Empire was a massive people group that existed in what is present-day Chile, Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, as well as Argentina. And we can see a little bit more on this map right here, as the majority of their empire stretched through the Andes mountain ranges. And all the way, or centrally located, was the capital of Cusco, which you might recognize from Emperor's New Groove, Disney movie, which drew a lot of influences from Incan culture with the alpacas and llamas and all, and architecture as well. But Cusco, being the capital, was about a 4 days walk from the site of Machu Picchu, which is where we're going to spend most of our time. And important to note, the timeline for all this is super duper short. The Incan Empire wasn't this ancient civilization 2,000 years BCE, but relatively recent, and that it started to form as a civilization of conjoining people groups around 1400 CE, or Common Era, up until the Spanish discovered, and we'll use our little air quotes for that, around in 1533, and until the end of the kind of Spanish conquest, or the final fall of the Incan Empire in 1572. So just 172 years of history, but a whole lot packed into that. So we're getting in a little bit closer, and we're seeing that capital of Cusco, which is really unique to see a capital far from the water, far from lakes, oceans, rivers. But Cusco is a very inland capital. And then that 4-day trip away was to the site of Machu Picchu. Draw all these blue dots right here, where we're going to explore a little bit more. We don't actually know what the specific purpose of Machu Picchu was, why this big kind of temple complex site was built, why it was built in this location, in this distance, but we have a pretty good guess because it was hypothetically built as either a royal retreat or a site of religious ceremony, and probably to one of the chief deities of the Inca people, who was Inti, the sun god. And even the ruler of the Incans was often called the Sapa Inca, which is son of the sun, S-O-N of the S-U-N, which is kind of fun. And here are some more list of those Incan deities, and that is a really pixelated shot. And we don't know about the specific site of Machu Picchu because the Incans didn't have a very definitive written language. There weren't any books, diaries, journals we could pick up and figure out just what was going on at that site. And this is an area that's still being researched. And one new form of research is that writing might have been in knots. They may have used rope with knots tied in to denote numbers or years. Like this example right here. So pretty interesting that an entire massive civilization could develop without kind of written knowledge as we know it today. But stuff may still come out more and more. So we're going to go ahead and hike on the Incan Trail, which was the traditional trail leading from that capital of Cusco all the way to the site of Machu Picchu, which again might have been a royal retreat where those rulers, the Sapa Inca, might have come for specific religious ceremonies, or it might have just been a site of specifically religious worship, religious importance, or ceremonial importance to this. So we're going to go ahead and poke around all over this area because it is a relatively big site on top of this mountaintop. And Machu Picchu really just means old peak, which is one interpretation of the name. So here's kind of an artist rendition of that Incan trail, that 4-day trail that religious leaders, that people would take to reach this site. And it's important to note that this was a primarily migratory site, meaning that there wasn't a massive stable population of folks that were living here with relative permanence. There weren't like the year-round folks. And this is because we're seeing from these ruins that a city or site of this size could hold about 750 people, but there wasn't nearly enough farming or agriculture to support that type of population year-round. So what probably happened was these big, massive trains or caravans with maybe a leader atop right here being carried may have made their way out via the Incan Trail, which this right here where my cursor is the Incan Trail. This right here is the Harum Bingham Highway or road leading up. So the traditional route was out this way. It's also important to note on this artist rendition that the Incan people they probably had an understanding of the wheel, as it was found evidence in toys or smaller pieces, but they didn't use the wheel as we use the wheel today for transportation or industrial means. The Inca people probably didn't have draft or riding livestock, oxen, horses, things that could help with travel and work. And then they also didn't have a super in-depth knowledge of steel or other metals too. So despite being that massive civilization, they definitely had different areas of engineering and ingenuity, which actually was a bit of a problem in 1529 when Francisco Pizarro, a Spanish explorer with the quotation marks, discovered the Incan Empire. Francisco Pizarro thought it was super neat and interesting, and so he went all the way back to Spain in his boat and politely asked the queen if he could take over the lands and take them from the Inca people. The queen said, sure, that sounds like a really good idea. That's swell. Make sure you bring back some gold for your home country of Spain. And with that, Francisco Pizarro, I have the numbers written down because it's crazy. Francisco Pizarro returned with 168 men, 168, that's all, 1 cannon and 27 horses, and proceeded to conquer the Incan Empire as we know it. How? He probably needed a little bit of help, and he did have help in the really inhumane form of foreign diseases, or probably foreign diseases, that were brought by European explorers, European settlers. And some of those diseases included smallpox, typhus, measles, and influenza, or just the flu, which decimated the native population. Additionally, there was a current civil war going on between two factions within the Incan Empire, which added to the disjointedness of the Incans. Additionally, some of the Inca elite even wanted or accepted Spanish rule to come in and take them over and show them how they could ride pretty white horses like this. That's not true, but there were some Incan people that were interested or less against Spanish or foreign rule. And what we're looking at right here is on the opposite side of Machu Picchu in the Incan bridge, which there were supposedly a secret entrance to the backside of Machu Picchu. For whatever reason, maybe based on this secret bridge, maybe based on the Incan Trail itself, but there is no evidence that Spanish conquistadors found the site of Machu Picchu. They probably never made it, which there was no looting, or Spanish graffiti was also a thing, and how we understand and know that the Spaniards were in certain places. So no evidence that the Spanish conquered or made it to Machu Picchu. During that period, after whatever that was, 1529, 1572, the Inca Empire falls, and Machu Picchu becomes, a silly term, but a lost city. Was it ever really lost? Was there ever a time when no human beings knew where it was at? Probably not. Locals, farmers, folks in the area probably always knew that there was this big old site on top of a mountain, but to peoples of European descent, to the rest of the world, for all intents and purposes, Machu Picchu was lost until 1911, when a lecturer from Yale University, Hiram Bingham, was making his way out. And I thought this was a really cool artist rendition of Hiram Bingham, who would have made it to Cusco. And upon hearing rumors of ruins a 4 to 5 day walk away, enlisted the help of some locals to help him right here with his one mule that he brought, no other pack animals in the area, but enlisted the help of locals to rediscover Machu Picchu. And that rediscovery gets a weird rap, because again, it probably was never lost. And here's what I thought was a fun picture. I believe this is Machu Picchu from the backside in a really old black and white photo that lends itself to kind of the Indiana Jones take on things. Indiana Jones was motivated, inspired, George Lucas, whatever. Indiana Jones was motivated and inspired as a character by the likes of Hiram Bingham and other archaeologists. This is kind of problematic because Indiana Jones and his key line of this relic it belongs in a museum is like the thing that he says. Well, there's actually a lot of disagreement in that, and that old archaeology around that same time period was often described as loot and scoot, which is probably not good, in which non-native individuals came under the guise of research and understanding and often pillaged or straight up stole artifacts from these ruins. Not good, not ideal. They probably belong with the same culture, with the same landowners, with the same real stewards. And for the longest time, and I think even now, Yale is still embroiled in legal battles as Peru, the country, is requesting or even demanding that Yale gives back those artifacts that were illegally or wrongfully taken from there. But this is probably one of the views that we saw from, or that Hiram Bingham saw from the Sun Gate as we spin around. Sorry for the motion sickness. There's a sun gate back here, and this was probably one of the first views he saw of the ruins as we go down the Inca Trail. And let's finally get into Machu Picchu in earnest, which as we continue down the Inca Trail, we would have come across a lot of big terraced lands, which is kind of a marvel of engineering that these ancient peoples and civilizations could construct on the side of a mountain farmland. It was relatively fertile. There was enough rain that we could harness irrigation and water runoff to just naturally irrigate all the plants that we're growing here. And additionally, it countered, this terraced landscape, countered a lot of erosion that would happen as well. And here's just one shot of cultural, traditional Peruvian food, and that there was probably a lot of corn being grown here and potatoes, and the meat may have come from, kind of sad, but llamas or alpacas that were brought into the area. Llamas and alpacas were native to higher elevations, 13,000 feet plus. Machu Picchu just sits at 8,000 feet. So llamas and alpacas were both brought in. What's the difference between a llama and an alpaca? Well, this handy infograph will share that llamas have that longer face. They're a little bit more spitty than their cousin in the alpaca, whereas the alpacas have that shorter, fluffier face and apparently a little bit nicer temperament. But as we go down the Inca Trail, this was probably a big area of agriculture that was taking place to support those seasonal populations that came here. Let's see if we can get up above the clouds and get our first real shot. Slide 10, took me forever, but we got there, of Machu Picchu, the ancient city. And this is what it looks like and how we know it today. Did it probably look like this? Whatever that was, quick math, 500 years ago? No, it probably looked a lot different, but this is what's been preserved, thanks in part to the Peruvian government, as well as that UNESCO designation does help it. And it is one of the more trafficked locations in the world for tourism. I believe, I've got it written down somewhere, it was 1.5 million people traveled here in 2017, which is pretty wild. But these sites right here that we can see, there's probably about 200 buildings or sites have been recorded archaeologically. And that's because some of them are also right behind us in the form of guard houses that are still standing. And as we look behind this area, archaeologists guess was probably the royal retreat, or where the more prestigious of the population would live and spend their time, because, oh, there's a llama right there. Saw one, don't spook him. This is where the royal or the royal or religious population would spend their time. And why not? Because you've got really cool views swinging out like this. But let's go amongst the people as we go into the residential sections of the city and the site. And right here, this still standing doorway is now referred to as the Puerta de la Ciudad, the portal to the city. And again, 1.5 million people each year probably walk through that doorway, which is crazy. Machu Picchu has a lot of really good tourist management policies, and it's one of the more progressive sites in terms of being managed. Whether it's putting a cap on daily number of people that come in, whether it's specific ticketing, they're doing some really cool stuff to preserve the site for future generations. Let's go ahead and keep walking and go into that city just to get a little look at how this would look if you were, you're in the 15th century and you're here. It's not always going to be that picturesque postcard view from atop the hill. But we are through the Puerta de la Ciudad, and we are actually in a quarry area. Machu Picchu was built on a fault line, which archaeologists, historians think that was on purpose to give a big usable amount of rock, because that's what the entire city is made out of. So that fault line would have contributed to having rock easily accessible, which it would have been problematic if we needed to bring rock and stone from far away. Again, we don't have draft animals. We're not using the wheel as other civilizations have. These rocks and stones are probably getting carved, chiseled, and moved by hand, by people, which is pretty wild to think about. We're going to talk about I'm jumping ahead. We're going to talk about how they actually set those stones in place as well. But let's get back on track to look at this. And as you're looking at this rock wall, as you're looking at this building right here, you might notice something is missing. And what is that something might be missing is between the rocks in the form of mortar or some kind of concrete, some paste to hold everything together, because these just look like rocks that were stacked on top of each other. And that is because that's exactly what it is. The technique was referred to as ashlar, as far as building and constructing, and stones were chiseled, polished, cut, and carved so that they would fit almost perfectly together, which these don't look like they're almost perfectly fit, but then they could withstand, hypothetically, some level of shake from earthquakes. Again, we're on a fault line, and we didn't have to have mortar to contain or really seal those together. Let's see if we can get a better shot of that. Here's our more polished, our better cut rocks. And in this wall with these windows, you can see how those stones have been carved. And one way that folks think that that happened is during the cutting process, rocks would be cut and carved with handles on them for people, sometimes tens, hundreds of people, to lift or pull these rocks. And then once the rocks were set in place, the handles were actually polished all the way off. So all of a sudden it looks really pretty, and it looks like this miracle that, whoa, how did we get that huge stone to rest on top of these other huge stones with nothing else? So that ashlar strategy or way of doing things is pretty unique to think about. Let's swing around and let's see if we can see. And there's back to our quarry pile, so at least we wouldn't have to carry those rocks very far. We'll keep on rolling to the next spot. And again, like we said, Machu Picchu was about 200 different buildings and sites. And it also had different zones. We saw that agricultural zone to produce enough food to support those populations. And these tighter, smaller corridors may have been residential areas that could house those 750 people at its peak. Or there's a lot of hypothesis around sacrificial altars, around prisons, around jails, around other religious pieces or religious facilities. And again, the answer is we're still just kind of guessing at things as researchers, as archaeologists. One really good window into what may have happened has been found in skeletal remains. And the bone structure and chemical composition of these skeletons seems way too high tech. It seems like some FBI forensic stuff, but that's what's actually happening. The bones are yielding or showing us that the chemical composition of the remains means that folks didn't live here year round. There were chemical compositions that are usually considered to have a coastal diet. There's also some bone indications that folks wouldn't have lived at this altitude for their entire lives. They may have lived at higher or lower altitudes. And this is also showing us that there aren't a lot of tombs or big religious monuments in the form of like sacrifices or important royal burials. So those are some helpful hints into what was actually going on. But again, we don't have a perfect window into that. We'll keep on rolling. And it wasn't all those little tight packed corridors for who knows why. There were big temple squares or city squares like this, and leading up to some very specific astrological pieces that the Incan people were known for. Like a lot of ancient South American civilizations or Central American civilizations, the Incan people were amazing astronomers. And that was probably tied into the fact that a lot of their gods, worship, and religiousness revolved around like Inti, that god of the sun. But this unbecoming just rock and stone right here that doesn't look like much is actually pronounced Intihuatana, which is hitching post to the sun. And during the winter solstice, the sun is either directly overhead or the longest shadow. I can never remember. But regardless, during different times of the year and different locations that the sun is in, it will either cast no shadow or multiple shadows, showing that this people group had a really innate and really advanced knowledge of astronomy, the stars and the planets, and it did play an important role in some of their religious structures. Let's see if we can switch around. Oh, I lost my spot. Let me jump back to the Intihuatana. Intihuatana. Excuse me, I think I messed it up like 3 times. And let's go ahead and fly on back to our main view. Super sweeping, super spectacular view that we get to have of Machu Picchu. Again, a lot of mysteries surrounding this, air quotations, lost city. And really cool to know that only 500 years ago, that seems recent in human history and the scope of things, but there's so many question marks about one of the most popular places in the entire world that's inspired archaeologists, explorers, National Geographic as a company. Hiram Bingham was one of the first grantees or people that they gave money to explore. So rightly a UNESCO World Heritage location and site. Incredible to see for its natural beauty, its human history, and still a lot more secrets to unlock at a location like this. So I will stop my portion right there. And now we do have a little bit of time left over. If you'd like to throw a question into the Q&A, again, I'm far from an expert, but I will do my darndest to answer it, despite never having been there. Haven't been yet, but definitely planning a trip, as so many of you are. And we'll try and swing around some of these other spots while we check out the Q&A. Kimberly asks, when is the best time to visit Machu Picchu? Which is a great question. I don't know about the best, but the peak season is usually July through September. And that can sometimes see 6,000 human beings per day. So if you're okay with crowds, July through September is good. December and February, it's still open and usually only sees about 2,000 people per day. Again, these are definitely non-COVID related numbers. The site did reopen in the beginning of November, just this month, but they have specific protocol in place for visiting safely. What does Machu Picchu mean? It probably means just old peak or old mountaintop. Nothing specific to the language of the Inca people that was called Quechua. I did this with Google pronunciation and it kept telling me I was doing it wrong. Quechua. I was overpronouncing the O. Quechua was the language of the ancient Incan people. And Machu Picchu probably just means old peak, is best guess so far. Oh, Megan has a super good question about accessibility accommodations. And that I don't know of. I know that most people don't do that full Incan Trail, that 4-day hike with camping all the way to get to the site. I'm relatively certain that Hiram Bingham Road you can use to get up. Gosh, I don't want to give out bad information. Definitely do your homework. I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer for that. Let's check it out. What is the wildlife in Machu Picchu? I'm not sure about the native plants, animals, and birds. I do just have that one cheesy fact that alpacas and llamas were probably brought to the area and now still live there and exist. Despite there not being people, this is kind of their home now. But another fun one was in some of the burial sites, they would find guinea pigs, which were hypothetically used as a staple food group for Inca people, but also maybe like a snack in the afterlife, which is kind of terrible to think about. From Christy, what is the theory about why the Incans left here? Less of a theory, more of it was probably abandoned during that tumultuous time of the Spanish conquerors, the conquistadors being in the area. And again, it probably was never this massive urban center, relatively difficult to get to, hard to have a year-round food supply. So a bunch of different reasons, but I don't actually know why no one was actually living in that specific site. I don't know the actual reason why Cusco was chosen as the capital of the Inca Empire, but I do have some fun mythology stories, which I'm always into. And one of them is about the Ayermenco and his 3 other brothers. Ayermenco was the sons of a god, and the god was displeased with humans, as happens in a lot of god stories, and sent a massive flood to wipe out all the people. Ayermenco and his 3 brothers, when the floods and the waters receded, they started walking around on the land trying to figure out where would be the best spot to settle. They needed fertile land to grow crops, so that's kind of reason number 1, impetus number 1. The oldest brother found a cave, and as he went in the cave door sealed behind him. And that's it. That was all. The other 2 brothers, upon seeing different statues on their journeys, didn't pay enough respect to the statues and were petrified and turned into stone. Ayermenco was the only one that made it all the way to Cuzco, and with another myth, may have sunk a golden scepter into the sand, or not the sand, but the soil, and that was when he knew that it was fertile and a really good place to settle. So not the actual reason, but a creation myth reason that I think sometimes are more fun. Tourists do get elevation sickness, and there have been some deaths associated with that. Despite it only being at 8,000 feet, the rest of these Andes mountains are super duper high up, sometimes 13,000 plus feet. I have not heard that one way to combat it is by eating cocoa leaves. That would be interesting to look into and research more. Another good way is just to acclimatize or try and ascend, get higher and higher slowly, and sleep so your body can get used to it instead of going super high, super fast. I do not know if Quechua, I'm going to butcher that name again. I'm so bad at these. I do not know if the indigenous language is still spoken there. I would assume there's still some pockets of that cultural that exist, but definitely something good to look into and keep exploring. Let's jump to another site. We've all been looking at this one for a while. We'll just fly over here. Oh, Philip, who might have been there, says transport by train is usually the most common to get there from Cusco. Thank you, Philip. Let's see. These are so many good questions that I actually have no idea about. These are great. How many years is Machu Picchu old? It was probably built in 1450. It was probably only inhabited and used by people until those Spanish conquistadors in about 1550. So probably only 100 years of use, but still exists today. So 2020 minus 1450. And a lot of folks are saying it is a day trip from Cusco. So thank you for throwing that in there. All right. Again, these are so many really good questions that I have no idea about. So I'll go ahead and throw some links into the chat because I need to do my homework. But that UNESCO, UNESCO link should have a lot of good resources where you can follow along and get to where you need to go. I'm glad this sparked so many really good questions. I look forward to, I'm going to go research and find out some more. And I hope you do too. And then I hope we all get a chance to travel there someday in a safe, responsible manner in the future. So thank you all for joining us and hanging out. There will be a recording of this with captions that gets put up on our YouTube page, as well as we have a couple more events as we're closing it out this year. Zion National Park, film locations from Lord of the Rings. We're getting goofy with it. We're reaching. And film locations from Star Wars, which I'll be doing, and a handful of other guest speakers. So thank you for coming. We hope you had a good time, and we hope to see you again.